Miami, we're having a cold snap here. It went down to 65 degrees. Everyone's got the heavy coats on. We're here today for the third weekly robotics Google Hangout. We're here tonight with Mert Sedef. He's a software engineer from Mimic Technologies in Seattle. He's going to give a good part of this discussion to going over the robotic simulator, surgical simulator that his company makes in Seattle. This is a series designed basically to educate me as well as other people to this relatively new medical field, because we're kind of going to concentrate on the medical influence of robotics on or the medical influence from robotics, because certainly as Mert and I were talking about, robotics does have an influence on industry and a lot of other things. But we're going to concentrate on medicine here. It's going to be a weekly robotics Google Hangout. We're going to try to keep it interesting and educational. And tonight, Mert is going to talk about his company and what the simulator does. So welcome, Mert.
Hi, Dr. Bennett. Thanks a lot for the great introduction. It's a pleasure for me, myself, and for Mimic Technologies to be here talking to you about medical robotics and simulation training in medical robotics in general. Hello from sunny Seattle. Let's just actually I am in front of one of our simulators. If you want to take a peek, this is one of our simulators called DB Trainer, and I'll definitely talk more about it. But let me get going with my slides, and I'll go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah, I'll let you know when it comes up, Mert.
Mm-hmm. Can you see it?
Not yet. Just okay. Yep, it's perfect.
Okay, awesome. All right. Today I'm going to talk about virtual reality-based simulation training in robot-assisted surgery. I am one of the software engineers from the software team of Mimic Technologies, and I have been with the company since 2009. And let's see. And I'm going to go over a simple outline of what I'll be talking about today. I'll first talk about the need of training and the motivation behind it in medicine in general. And then I'll talk a little bit about minimally invasive surgery that I shorten as MIS, and robot-assisted surgery, which is a variety of minimally invasive surgery. I'll talk about conventional and virtual reality-based training techniques that has been used so far in surgical training, and then I'll talk a little bit about Mimic Technologies and the DB Trainer, our robot-assisted surgical simulator, and then in general benefits of generic virtual reality-based simulation in robot-assisted surgery training, and then I'll go into the details of how we do it here at Mimic. What is the approach of Mimic really when it comes to developing a simulator for training robotic surgery. I'll talk about training modules, exercises, different skills that we want the user to focus on to practice. In general, how we do simulation, how we do performance evaluation, what kind of availability there is out there for people to get trained in different institutions and training centers in different classes. I'll talk about curriculum development and sharing, independent validation studies, and maybe paired dry lab and VR training together. So throughout medical history, surgical training has traditionally followed the apprenticeship model, in which the novice surgeons get together with their peers and superiors, and they acquire skills by observing experienced surgeons in action and then progressively performing additional surgical procedures with varying degrees of supervision. The operating room in this technique of training had been the most common, the most readily available, and often the only setting where hands-on training takes place. And this so-called see one, do one, teach one paradigm has proven reasonably effective for more than 2,500 years. It was like that in 1600s for open surgery. It was like that in 1960s, and today it is like that for laparoscopic surgery, and it is like that for robotic surgery. However, the experts have started questioning the efficiency and value of that. According to a recent report from Institute of Medicine in 1999, it is estimated that medical errors cost between 70 to 29 billion a year. In that, 44,000 to 98,000 Americans die every year just from preventable medical errors. I mean, when you compare that, to the analogy, imagine the public outrage if nearly 5 full 747 jumbo jets crashed each week. That is unacceptable. A surgeon named James Butch-Russer, in a study of his, he determined that 82% of 150 self-proclaimed laparoscopic experts could not tie an intracorporeal knot in a box trainer within 10 minutes. And these people claim that they were the experts. And he says they found out that they were the surgeons or trainees, not angels of mercy, but well-paid assassins. So in particular, minimally invasive surgery, MIS, is a revolutionary surgical technique that has been in use in various procedures since the 60s. In comparison to open surgery, in this technique, they make only small incisions, small openings, and this technology involves a small video camera and a few customized surgical instruments, as you can see here, to be inserted into the body through small skin incisions to explore internal cavities. For patients, this has major advantages over open surgery, including shorter hospital stay, quicker return to activities, and less pain and scarring just because the openings are so small. However, this technique also poses immediate need for improved training methods because it has its own problems like visualization. Visualization of internal organs are achieved with a wide-angle camera, but it is monoscopic and limited in the camera's field of view. The hand-eye coordination is difficult because surgeons move the tool around the pivot point, around where they insert the tools to the body. Thus, that inverts the direction of movement inside and outside the body. When the surgeon's hand goes right, the instrument tips goes left around that pivot point. And the instruments rotate about a fixed entrance point, making it impossible for surgeon to perform direct translation of movements as in the open surgery. And they also receive limited haptic feedback due to that limitation of a single pivot point that they're entering. Robot-assisted surgery, in comparison to the laparoscopic surgery, to just define it, it is a non-autonomous, minimally invasive surgical tool, really, the surgical robot itself. And it is nothing more than a master-slave system, which is composed of a console and patient side. And again, the robot-assisted surgery is really like conversion of the traditional laparoscopic surgery into a slightly different varied version using a surgical robot that is under full control of the surgeon. The surgeon in this technique just sits on this console here and controls a number of manipulators like joysticks and places his hands on these controllers to control the arms of the robot on the patient side, as you can see here. And he has also access to a set of pedals where he can use his feet to apply a number of different functionality, like applying energy, like controlling the camera arm on the patient side, or clutching, or switching the controls from one arm to another. And the robot-assisted surgery compared to laparoscopic surgery, it is mind-blowing. It is so great and such advantageous in many different manners. Compared to laparoscopic instruments, which are like long sticks, as I showed you before here, the robotic arms on the patient side are fitted with surgical instruments which can actually rotate at their wrists. And as you can see in these photos, the surgical arms of the robot is capable of replicating the rotations of the human wrist. And therefore, these articulated surgical instrument arms can mimic wrist movement, and it can make it much easier for the surgeon to handle and manipulate tissues inside the body. And their movement is direct and intuitive. Just like laparoscopic surgery, these robotic arms on the patient side enter the body through small incisions, but the movement of them are one-to-one, meaning, or direct, meaning when the surgeon is moving his right hand from left to right, then the instrument being controlled with that right hand is going from left to right. And you can also scale the amount of movements from the console so that if you're going like 5 units in your actual workspace, then the robotic arm can only move maybe just 1 unit or 3 units, much less, so that when you're working on really delicate tissue, then it gives you much more flexibility and a larger workspace area on your own console to be able to work more freely on that delicate tissue. And as you can see on this photo, the surgical instruments are tiny. They're really, really small, which makes it really easy to work on very delicate tissue and small tissue. Another advantage, in addition to articulated surgical arms, is the vision technology of the robot. The robot has stereo, meaning three-dimensional high-definition endoscope. At the tip of the endoscope, they have 2 high-definition cameras for each eye, for the left and right eye. And when this endoscope is in the body, then the surgeon on the console can just take a look at the stereoscope on the console and see everything in 3D. It's really as if like you just make a large incision in the body, and you as if it's like you just insert your head right there and zoom in right there onto the tissue so that you have this clarity and very high definition. It's amazing. And you can see here the left and right eye views, and if you appreciate the difference, these 2 images are slightly shifted along horizontal. That gives you the left and right eyes or right camera's view. And when you put these 2 images together in your stereoscope, then you get 3-dimensional view. So, as I said before, robotic-assisted surgery is wonderful in many ways. It has so many advantages. However, especially over laparoscopic surgery. However, like every system, it has its own problems. So it actually solves the visualization and indirect manipulation problem in laparoscopy. However, the hand-eye coordination, for example, still remains as a problem, not because it's hard on the robot to keep your hands and eyes are in coordination, but because just like every system, this system requires a getting used to. And there needs to be enough time spent for anyone to get used to that control, that specific control of the robot. Another advantage can be no haptic feedback. The robot console has haptic feedback only when you hit the joint limits on the patient side of the robot's arm. So those robotic arms on the patient side cannot infinitely move, and eventually they will hit their joint limits and they won't be able to move anymore. And during those times, the robot makes you feel. But other than that, the robot cannot, or by design it does not. I'm talking about the Da Vinci by Intuitive Surgical in this case. The Da Vinci does not give you any haptic feedback of the tissues that you're manipulating. So you can't really, or by design, you're not allowed to feel how much you're retracting a tissue, how much you're pushing a tissue. It can be pretty expensive to train on the robot, and it might be, difficult accessibility for training in general for the robot. I'll talk more about that in detail later, but all I can say right now would be like, not every hospital might have enough amount of robots to keep 1 or more robots reserved for training. And usually, according to our experience, it might very well be the case that once they buy a robot, they usually try to keep it busy in the operating room with operations, and that generates this difficult accessibility problem. And also, there are certain operation costs to the robot, to the use of the robot. Let's talk about a little bit the training methodologies that have been applied and used over time in laparoscopic training in general. So for laparoscopy in general, although the importance of minimally invasive surgery training is widely acknowledged, there's not a consensus on the most effective training method. One of them would be just box trainers, and in these box trainers, what you would do is you would have a box and you would have a few holes in that box where you can insert your laparoscopic instruments and your endoscope, and then you can take a look at the image coming from the endoscope on this monitor, and this setting pretty much kind of is trying to mimic, is trying to simulate what the situation is in the actual operating room. And in the box, there are some objects that you can work on to perform some tasks, like translating objects from a point to another point, like switching arms while translating them, like using your left arm and just picking up something and putting it and grabbing it with your right arm and then placing it somewhere. These box trainers can be effective, but they have their own disadvantages. Like the procedures are imitated poorly. These plastic objects here that you have in this in this box trainer cannot really imitate what's actually going on in the actual surgical case. They are not easily customizable, and it's not really easy to measure the performance objectively on a standard basis. With box trainers, you need a proctor with you. You need someone, an expert surgeon, who should take notes and who should evaluate you at the end, and the evaluation will not be standard and objective because that evaluation will depend on that person's tastes. How about other techniques? Like, there are also other techniques that are applied and used other than box trainers, like animal or cadaver training, in which case we are making it much, much closer to the actual case. You are actually working on an actual tissue in the animal or cadaver case, and therefore one might say that it's a much better training case. It has its own advantages, of course. As I said before, the realism is improved. However, it has its own disadvantages as well. Like, it can be pretty expensive for both animal and cadaver training. For the case of animal training, it might be quite controversial and non-ethical for some people's tastes or ideas. And again, for the case of animals, although the structures are real, they are different compared to human structures, meaning human tissues, meaning human anatomical structures. In the case of cadavers, the tissue properties have already changed. Although the cadaver is a part of the body or the entire body of a human, since the tissue is already dead, then the tissue properties change drastically and very fast since the beginning of death. And then that results in not as soft tissues, or the tissues start decomposing earlier and they don't react the same way as if they were real, and therefore that might result in some negative training, meaning people just might think that this would be the feeling that they are expecting to get from the actual real case, which is not the case here. And also, again, the performance measurement can be quite difficult because, again, it's going to be a non-objective performance measurement. You still need a person to really record what you have done and to evaluate you in a non-objective manner. So to sum up, the conventional minimally invasive surgery training techniques, like the box trainers, like the animal and cadaver training that we saw, they are lacking or they are there in need always for an instructor or supervisor to be just by you and to evaluate you at all times in a non-objective manner. The feedback methods are not standard, and as I already told you, the performance evaluation is subjective. How about virtual reality-based surgical simulators? How about the use of them in training in minimally invasive surgery in general? So a competent and realistic virtual reality-based surgical simulator can reduce the risks and constraints of surgical procedures. You will be actually working on virtual patients instead of actual patients, or instead of actual animals or cadavers, and then the risks are reduced and you're allowed to make mistakes. That is the beauty of it. You are allowed to learn from your own mistakes, and as you make mistakes, and if they are pointed out to you, then you can learn from them. The performance can be quantified, and also the progress, meaning the virtual reality surgical simulators are computer-based systems which can record everything that you have done during your session, in your exercise, and then they can objectively evaluate your performance based on those measures, and then it will be standard. It will standardize the training regimen because everybody will go through the exact same setup. Everybody will go through the same thing, and they will be evaluated according to the same metrics, maybe, or the same criteria. You can just drop in some unusual cases there, Like, for example, all of a sudden you can create a catastrophic case where a artery ruptures or something really bad happens, and you have like limited amount of time to repair what's going on there to be able to save the patient. And by just showing these kind of cases to trainees, you can train them to just control their stress levels. You can train them to do the right thing in the least amount of possible time to save the best out of the patient, and that will be wonderful. And you can also keep training, credentialing, and retraining people. According to our experience, training by itself might not be different. A person might have a robotic case or in general a surgical case right now, and then the next case might be in such a longer time later. And in the meantime that he doesn't have any chance to perform any surgeries, it would be great if he can go back and just keep training himself in an available virtual reality-based surgical simulator to just like keep his skills on the sharp at all times. And you can also credential people, since it's going to be a very objective, standardized training regimen. You can measure their performance the same, and you can use these simulators as the testing environment to credential them and to give them the allowance to start performing surgeries by their own. So in general, we believe that better trained physicians result into less errors, and that result into improved patient care. And all in all, realistic virtual reality-based simulators can revolutionize the medical education. And then, you know, that training paradigm of see one, do one, teach one might actually go and turn into see many, do many, and teach none in the future of surgical training, if we can provide them with realistic, objective training techniques like virtual reality-based surgical simulators. All right, I'm going to touch a little bit about our company background. So Mimic Technologies is founded in 2001, headquartered in Seattle, founded by Dr. Jeff Berkeley from University of Washington, from Human Interface Technologies Laboratory. Our business and research focus are currently on robotic surgery simulation, the DV Trainer, our surgical simulator. Another focus is force feedback device technology. On the core of the surgical simulator, this is really a force feedback device, and this device can also be used as masters to other robotic systems if wanted. And another focus of ours is simulation training, using virtual reality simulators, skills training for robotic surgery with our spun-off company MimicMed. The funding has been from Department of Defense with projects in collaboration with DARPA and TATREC, and also the funding also has been based on product and service revenue. And we have been collaborating with Intuitive Surgical, the maker of the Da Vinci robots, since 2003. Learning a lot from them and having access to a lot of details about the robot's design so that we can simulate it perfectly realistically in our own simulator. We have been collaborating with more than 80 medical institutions and research partners, in which we talk all the time. We learn about their needs. We learn about the medical or clinical side, and we try to focus then our efforts towards those areas where those professionals, those expert surgeons, think the need is for training. We have more than 1,000 simulators in place right now in the entire world, combined DV Trainer, the standalone simulator of ours, and Skill Simulator, the version, the on-board or on-robot version of DV Trainer, of the similar software that we provide and license to Intuitive, and they use the similar software on their own robot for virtual reality-based simulation. And we have been also collaborating with robotic surgery associations like conferences like MIRA, SRS, CRSA, or clinical associations like AUA. This is a list of our customers and research partners. We have a lot of customers in US, Canada, Japan, China, Korea, Europe, Middle East, and Brazil. All right, so let's now talk more about DV Trainer, our product and our approach of simulation. So DV Trainer is a skills trainer for robotic surgery. And it is the first simulator to recreate the look and feel of the Da Vinci surgery by Mimic Technologies. And it simulates the SNSI versions of the DaVinci surgical system. We can say that it's a cost-effective standalone alternative to learning directly on the robot. We can say that the target users would be like surgeons with less than 10 robotic cases and residents and fellows. And the applications would be robot training, DaVinci training for novice surgeons, skill retention and rehearsal, credentialing the surgeons and privileging, and also academic research. The benefits, as I touched before, would be reduced training costs. It's when compared to actual robot and compared to the training costs on the actual robot, we can say that it's less. It is also gonna introduce reduced need for training the robot. It saves from the OR time and cost because you don't need to really work on the robot if you have a simulator. And there are no required training instruments or robotic setup. The entire system is composed of this actual hardware of the console, and the virtual side, the patient side of the robot is entirely virtual. So the access to training would be increased because this is not a medical device, and you can keep a simulator anywhere, and therefore that gives 24/7 access. Anybody can go there and train themselves by themselves anytime. Then DaVinci utilization would be improved because it's, again, freeing up the clinical robot for revenue-generating procedures and increasing surgeons' efficiency. We experience, according to our experience, it is really clear that we have much more accelerated surgeon learning. The learning curve just speeds up so much with the use of a simulator. And then the patient safety, of course, is improved in general. So what we have in DV Trainer is we have different training modules. And these training modules are basically composed of exercises that focus on different robot-assisted surgical skills, like overview of the console, like knowing what the controls of the console do, like manipulating the endorists. If you remember earlier, I was talking about the articulated instrument arms of the robot that are called endorists by Intuitive, and the manipulation of them is important because you need to keep your hand-eye coordination up. You need to just train your hand-eye coordination good enough to be able to use those surgical instruments as if they are your wrists in the patient. The control of the camera and clutching, as I said before, the camera arm, the endoscope, is another arm on the robot and can be controlled by the surgeon. But how do you control it? You need to train for that. Energy and dissection, applying energy through the robot and doing dissection on actual tissue. And then controlling a curved surgical needle for doing suturing, driving that needle, and troubleshooting on the robot. The robot is eventually a system, and it can create or result in some erroneous states during the surgery. And what happens, when something like that happens? How do you control the robot? How do you put the robot back into operation? What do you do to fix that problem as soon as possible so that you can keep going with your surgery? And games module, just because we love games, we think that games are a great way of motivating people for training and for doing more and more practices, and it's the fun part of it. All right. And overall, in these 8 different modules, we have more than 50 highly realistic exercises. All those exercises are developed and validated in collaboration with our research partners, with many surgeons from all over the world. And in these photos, for example, I can talk a little bit. Like this particular photo is from a simple hand-eye coordination exercise called pick and place, in which you pick objects up using your instruments and place them in their matching colored buckets. This exercise here utilizes the fourth arm use and trains for the fourth arm use, in which, in this case, the fourth arm is retracting an obstacle to open up way for those other instruments to just continue with the task, which is driving a ring around a ureter-like structure in a deformable environment. This particular picture is a scene from a knot tying exercise in which you can tie and practice different knots, like granny knot, like overhand knot, like square knot. And the system even tells you, like, once you start a knot, tells you if it's the correct knot or not, or tells you how much further you should pull on your suture thread to make that knot as tight as possible for it to be ready. This particular exercise, for example, is energy application, making you train using the energy pedals on the robot to apply different energies to different targets. This is another knot tying exercise, and this is like an anastomosizing exercise where you're suturing two different ureter-like structures together using a double-ended suture. How do we simulate? So let's now talk about a little bit the nuts and bolts about the subject. So we think that knowledge and experience in state-of-the-art computer science is required for doing realistic real-time simulation, like computer graphics, virtual reality knowledge, physically based simulation knowledge, game development knowledge is necessary. And we think that the simulation should be needs-driven, not technology-driven. That means a lot of communication is essential with research partners, with medical professionals for exercise design, validation, and continuous feedback. We really need to figure out what is needed in those experts' eyes, in those experts' minds, as far as the training goes. We really need to figure what they think is needed for the best possible training, and we need to focus on that. And realism and accuracy is really important for simulation as well. And that brings up another very important point: collaboration with the maker of the robot. We have been collaborating with Intuitive since 2003, and that means we have access to accurate hardware design for the correct touch and feel. We have access to accurate robot kinematics modeling. That means we know exactly how the how the patient side of the robot will move according to what kind of inputs coming from the console. By having that knowledge, we can really simulate and just result in a one-to-one correct motion on the patient side, just as if you're really controlling the robot. And realistic instrument modeling and icon modeling is also important. If you see these two pictures, for example, the photo on the left is the actual instruments from a snapshot from the actual robot's endoscope manipulating the physical version of pick-and-place jacks. And on the right is a simulated version, and you can see how similar, if not the same, one-to-one, these instruments are modeled after the real actual instruments. On the picture top, you can see the real versus simulated version of the robot. The real version has a console, and you see how the surgeon sits, and you see how important it is to replicate that feel and touch, and replicate that that look, basically. And you see this surgeon, how he's sitting, and it's really similar to what the actual thing is. Another point to make about when we're talking about how we simulate is what the actual simulation engine is doing. So at Mimic, we have this simulation engine platform that we call MSIM 2.x, and it's our proprietary simulation platform, and it has realistic physics-based simulation, meaning all the interactions between objects are based on real physics formulas. And then we have realistic graphical rendering so that the physical objects and abdominal walls really look real. And then we have accurate texture mapping. You can see an image here on the left and on the right. The left is the real thing coming from the robot, and the right is the simulated thing. And you see how we can nail the visual effects here. The shadows, depth of field, bloom, and glare effects are the actual effects that you get from the robot's camera. And the better or the more similar that you can simulate them, the more realistic the feeling will be for the trainee on the simulator. And you can see we can easily replicate this bloom here. We can replicate soft shadows here. We can have a pretty realistic looking abdominal wall texture here. Another important thing is real-time simulation performance. Whatever you're doing, it needs to act really quickly. So meaning like there shouldn't be any lag in the system. If there's a lag, the person will just get bored of it. If there's a lag, it won't look realistic. Just like you're doing the actual thing in actual world settings, you're expecting all the objects that you're manipulating to react suddenly, to react immediately. And that means you have to have your calculations done very fast, meaning you have to have very fast algorithms. You have to have a robust, physically based engine for simulating all these object and instrument interactions. And another important point is being able to content generate rapidly, meaning right now our simulation platform is such that it only takes a few days really for us to put another simulation scenario in the simulator and get going with that, and that is great because we get constant and continuous feedback from all these different professionals, and if anybody comes up with a new idea, then it's really easy to generate that idea in terms of simulation in our simulator.
Mert, one quick question. Do you simulate bleeding? Is there actual bleeding in the simulator?
We do actually, and let's see if I have a photo with that. But there's an energy dissection exercise, and actually, you know what? The best would be here, going back to my view. Can you see me from the camera?
Well, I'm seeing you. Yeah, you got off the screen share.
Yes, I got off the screen share, and
you got to show them. Okay.
What I'm going to show here is I'm going to show a quick video.
Okay.
That shows our bleeding model.
Because that's something every surgeon faces. A bleeder they can't find. A bleeder they have to suture. A bleeder they have to stop.
So in this exercise, I don't know how good you can see, but let's see. So here you have a large kind of like arterial vessel here, or
yeah,
a vein.
I can see it well. See it very well.
And the task here is applying energy to coagulate two different points on these branches and then cut in between to result in the least amount of bleeding possible.
Right.
And if you cut something incorrectly, or if you cut before you start coagulating anything, then it will naturally bleed. And let's see how it bleeds. I'll scroll through the video. There you go. Can you see the bleeding?
Yes. Okay.
Okay, let's see.
Oh.
And I'm not sure if there's any other scene of bleeding. Yeah, there you go, another bleeding.
Okay.
So what is really interesting is we have this version where you just coagulate, cut, coagulate, cut for these different branches, and you're done. But there's another version which adds a little bit more stress, and it's like every different vessel has a random amount of time after coagulation, or after you cut them correctly. The coagulation starts fading away, and the vessels start rebleeding. So your task is, controlling and going back to other vessels to control that rebleeding and just try to, coagulate everything and result in a non-bleeding environment in as small time as possible.
That's a well-needed application.
We thought so, and that's the feedback that we got from people. It's really popular. So this is currently our bleeding model, but everything is getting more and more realistic even. I mean, we have much newer, better technology coming that just is going to come later in later releases.
Okay.
All right. Is there any other questions?
No, that's okay.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go back and share my screen. It was a good question. Thanks a lot for asking that.
Sure.
Okay. The Hangout is acting up. Let's see.
Okay. A lot of bandwidth. We're using a lot of bandwidth.
Yeah. You see my camera, right? So when I click on screen share button, the window that used to come out, it doesn't come out anymore.
Okay.
It just pops up a window where you can select what you wanna.
Okay. Okay. Is there anything I can do? Let's see here. Let me see if I can get my screen share. Well, why don't we impromptu do a promptu? Do you have the slides? Can you read off your slides, or we can just discuss what else is going on?
You mean from your side, or do you want me to continue with my slides?
Yeah, could you continue on your slides? Can you read them? Just read them instead of showing them.
Sure. I'm really sorry for this.
No, it's all right. We're just learning this tech. We're not perfect.
Okay. All right. So I was talking about how we were simulating, and I can say that I already told you that we have different modules, and those modules are like, we have exercises like dry lab simulation exercises, which replicates what you would find in a dry lab environment. And what we do also is we replicate the exact same physical dry lab environment for people to train using their own robots, so that if they have a simulator and if they have this physical version of the dry lab simulation exercise, then they can perform the same exercise both on their own robots with the actual robotic arms and on the simulator, and they can compare their performances to each other because the environment is the same. And then we have simple exercises in anatomy, like the one that I just showed you on this monitor. Like you're applying you're training your energy skills, you're applying different energy types and coagulating and cutting in a simple environment. We have procedure step-like exercises where it is like you are, for example, suturing two deformable structures to each other, like as if you're anastomosizing, the bladder together. Those are like procedure step-like exercises. We have procedure-specific exercises that are coming, in which, for example, we went ahead and recorded a right partial nephrectomy, for example, surgery in an actual operating room from the robot's camera, and then using that video material that we recorded, we replicated that in the simulation environment and augmented our own virtual reality elements on it, and used augmented reality technology to actually make a simulation of a procedure-specific exercise, like the simulation version of a right partial nephrectomy exercise. And we think that the future, is going into awesome directions. As there will be more training need, the requirement from these exercises we think is going to increase, and there will be more complexity increases needed from people. What do I mean by that? Maybe dry lab simulation exercises or a procedure step-like exercise is really good for focusing on basic robot-assisted surgical skills, but how about more advanced robot-assisted surgical skills? Or how about like more using more information, like how about patient-specific exercises? How about the idea of being able to just get some imaging information from a patient, like having some CT scan images or ultrasound images, and using some information from those images and then loading those information into your simulator, meaning like the simulator can create a virtual reality version of an organ model that you're gonna work on, and that will have the exact same properties with that of the patient, and then that would give you a chance or opportunity to kind of like work on the virtual replica of your patient, and then you can rehearse different ideas of operation before the operation on that virtual patient without killing anybody, and then you can just learn from your mistakes, or you can try a few different techniques and maybe come up with the best one. So feature can really go in that direction. How about full procedure simulation, like from start to finish? Like robotic surgery does not only involve just the surgeon sitting on the console and starting the surgery. No, before that, the entire operating room staff still needs to prepare the operating table, the patient. They need to prepare the robot's patient side. They need to, redirect or direct the robotic arms. They need to create the incisions on the body. They need to initially place and position those robotic arms for the surgeon, for it to be ready for surgeon's command. So how about just simulating those parts of the entire thing, so that not only the surgeon but also the operating room staff is also trained on their own skills? How about operating room choreography? How about team training? These are all interconnected ideas, and we think that over time the needs and the technology will the needs will be such that, and the technology will allow us to go into all these different areas to even make a much richer simulation environment for training. And when I was talking about team training today, actually, we released another product that is called Experience, that is a laparoscopy surgical trainer for training the first assist, for training the first assistant on the operating table, who is helping the surgeon by like retracting tissues or moving tissues around to open up the way. And that is, that product is coming out because we think that it is needed to not only train the surgeon but also train other operating room staff. I'll talk a little bit about the skills focus that the surgical simulator has in terms of robotic skills go. We have exercises for system settings and controls, as I said before, endorsed manipulation, camera control. Clutching is a different and new idea. Like eventually when you're using your robot on your workspace is physically limited. You can only have so much room with your hands to control stuff. What if you just run into your limits and end up like not being able to move your hands anymore, to move the instruments on the patient side? When that happens, you basically clutch just like you're clutching in a stick shift. And then when you clutch, for example, the robot freezes the patient side's instrument arms, and then your hands become free, and you can relocate them to a comfortable area, to a comfortable place, or to a place where you'll have more workspace, and then you can disable clutching to get the control back of the instruments. And that is really important. And to our experience, what we see that in more experienced surgeons' cases, they use clutching a lot. They use camera a lot. They not only just use the robotic instruments at all times, but they clutch and relocate their hands, and they tend to work in very small, actually, and comfortable working space instead of just like being all over the space. And that's what we see with more novice surgeons.
Mm-hmm. Do you spend a lot of time, Mert, in the operating room with surgeons? Do you spend any time at all, or?
We do, actually, yeah. We do a lot of observations. We do those observations to see like what kind of problems that they run into, and like to figure if we can create training scenarios out of those. Okay. Or we listen to surgeons very carefully, during their surgeries, to try to learn what areas they think would be interesting to train on, or would be really beneficial to train on, because many of those people are really teaching professionals as well, and all while they're doing their surgeries, they talk about a lot of information. They give a lot of information on the actual case, and there might be very interesting situations, when they're dealing with the tissue, and all of a sudden, from somewhere that you won't even know, they can come up with this brilliant idea after they see something interesting in the tissue when they're working on it.
When you're doing procedure simulation, you must work very closely with the surgeons, because they have to tell you everything. They have to show you everything.
We do. So we just came up with this proof of concept release. Let's see. It was around maybe a year ago, or maybe 6 months ago. Probably 6 months ago. Time frame, but I was talking about this right partial nephrectomy simulation case.
Yes.
When we were developing that procedure-specific simulation, we actually worked very, very closely in collaboration with a few surgeons. One of them is Dr. Gill, Dr. Inderbir Gill from USC Institute of Urology. He's the chairman, and also Dr. Andrew Hung. He's a colleague of Dr. Gill, and we worked very close with them. And Dr. Gill is a phenomenal surgical expert, and he has done many robotic cases. He's very well known, and we're getting wonderful, very valuable information from them while we're putting all this together.
How much programming? Do those surgeons know programming and know exactly what you're doing and what kind of information you need?
We try to get as much clinical feedback from them as possible. It's not the case that they know programming. What we try to do is we basically just try to explain the technological limits and what we can do in general, and then we try to come and meet at a point where we both think that it's going to be useful enough, or it's going to be at a level technologically that will be useful for training. They come with this incredibly valuable clinical feedback and come up with the things that they think people should be trained on, and according to those things, then we come up with situations together, or like cases to train on. Yeah,
I imagine it's close collaboration to develop a simulation like that. It's not just one-sided, it's two-sided.
It's utmost importance, really. I mean, at Mimic here, we are not claiming that we are teaching medicine. We are not claiming that we are teaching clinical part of the things. Those things, we are feeding on those things from all these experts, all these experienced surgeons that we are collaborating with, and they are filling in those parts. And then, we are trying the best possible technological scenario to make use of all those different training ideas or clinical cases to be able to train people on the robot the best possible way.
Very good.
All right, let me just go through real quick. I'm not left with a lot more.
Okay.
I'm going to talk about, let's see if I can continue sharing. No, I still can't share. That's all right. So we think that performance evaluation is a big part as well. I mean, you can just show people a number of different exercises and you can just make them practice those exercises a lot, but in the end, you really need to have a standardized and validated, correct way of evaluating those people. And for that, again, in collaboration with many experts, we came up with different metrics. And we basically just record every single thing that happens during an exercise session in the computer. And then after that exercise session ends, according to that recorded data, we analyze that recorded data with respect to those defined metrics. And those defined metrics would be like the total time a person takes to complete the exercise. We see that, that time is much shorter with experienced surgeons. The economy of motion, meaning how much they move their patient-side instruments while they're performing a task. Again, with experts, to our experience, we see that they do their job in a much less amount of motion when they're controlling their instruments. How about the instrument collisions? We keep track of the fact that if there are any instrument collisions or not, because in the real case, in the real surgeon's robot, if there is an instrument collision, then, and if that instrument collision is like a rough collision, then you always have the risk of maybe breaking an instrument. And if you do that, then you have to replace that instrument, and that kind of like brings your surgery to a halt for some amount of time until that instrument is taken out and replaced with a new one. So that is important. We don't want that to happen, and we want our trainees to be prepared for those kind of situations and not really collide their instruments. How about excessive instrument force? We have metrics like instruments out of view, which is really important. And instruments out of view means, you have your limited view of your camera, and it is possible for your instruments to be out of that view. If you just move them out, you're out. And then if that is the case, you no longer have the view of your instruments, and therefore you don't know what those instruments are doing if you don't see them. And that, those instruments may be cutting something out there, or they might be just puncturing something. That's not good. So we keep track of that metric. We keep track of like misapplied light energy. If they're doing an energy application exercise, and if apply a incorrect energy to a place that they're not supposed to, then we keep track of that and we let them know. Like blood loss volume, like if they lose more than a certain amount of blood, then we let them know about that as well. So what we did with this performance evaluation system is we went ahead and made nearly around 100 expert robotic surgeons with more than 75 robotic cases, and we made them go through our exercises and recorded their data. And that means, with that data, we kind of established a baseline for proficiency. And we statistically analyzed that data and came up with passing values for each of these metrics that I just talked about. And that means our trainees here, are not just training themselves towards, any made-up values for any of these metrics. These metric values are coming from the experts, and what we want basically here is we want the trainees' level of performance to eventually reach to the expert surgeon's level of performance on the same exercise in the same simulator. And if that happens, then what we call they have reached proficiency, and that's why our performance evaluation system is called proficiency-based system, and it is kind of modeled after you must have heard of it, fundamentals of laparoscopic surgery. And in that model, it's really similar. They just made a few expert surgeons go through their exercises and collect baselines, and they're testing people against those baselines to give them credentials and to let them start doing their own surgeries. And we believe that this is utmost important, and there should be validated, correct way of performance analysis. And another thing I'd like to talk about is M-Share, which is being able to share different curriculum. Meaning, in this simulator, we have more than 50 exercises, and as an administrator, an experienced surgeon can go in here and create different curricula, which is basically like different selections of different groups of exercises. Like they can create a basic level exercise group in a curriculum which focuses directly on complete novices. They can create another curriculum, for example, for expert surgeons to come back and do skills retention, to just like keep their skills sharp, which would be composed of higher level, higher difficulty exercises. And what can happen is a really experienced surgeon can come up with a good way, a very good curriculum that proves that it is working really good in training their own surgeons, and then he can export it from the simulator and upload it to a website that's called mshare, and another person then can just download that same curriculum and upload that to their own DV trainer, to their own simulator. Therefore, other people can share and collaborate using the curriculum that they have created their own, and then they can have, you know, similar experience. They can use the same training lessons that they have learned using other people's curriculum. And that just results in collaboration, basically, and interaction between different institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to talk about training centers. So we have another sister company that's called Mimic Med, that's spun off Mimic, and this Mimic Med company is located in Florida, in Nicholson Center, right next to or within the campus of Florida Hospital at Celebration. And Mimic Med has a training center there, including, I think, more than 10 DV trainers. And in that center, people actually can sign up for courses to get trained on different skills. And this is a training center that is under the control of Mimic. However, there are other training centers which still use DV trainers, Mimic simulators, on their own, but they're private. Like there is Nancy University Hospital in France, and they have around 5 DV trainers, if I'm not mistaken, and they have used their DV trainers as part of a robotic skills training course or set of classes that they are administering there. And actually, they give diplomas after those classes. And also, there are ongoing classes that are held in different conferences, like Americans Association of Urology, like AUA, like AAGL, like SAGES, like ACS. In these different medical conferences, Mimic partners with these different conferences and brings out simulators to host classes and courses that are also designed in collaboration with, for example, the leaders of those conferences, again with surgeons, and then people can sign up for those and get on-the-fly training right on those conferences. And especially at Mimic Med, again, they can have full-day, half-day courses, individual training, and also some of these training can be integrated with Intuitive Surgical, because Intuitive Surgical also holds different training classes at different places. And they collaborate with Florida Hospital a lot, just like we do, and some of those courses can be common. And let's see. And one final point, I guess, I would like to touch on is validation, which we are very fond of. We think that, you know, any system out there that claims that is training for anything should be independently validated. And that means the real professionals really just need to get on the systems and really decide that if those systems are of any use for actual training, if they're really useful for training. And right now, DV Trainer, our own surgical simulator for robotics, is the only standalone simulator that has been independently validated to show all different 5 important validation categories. They are face, content, construct, concurrent, and predictive. Those mean face validity is measuring how realistic your simulation is. Content validity is how useful your simulator is as a training tool. Construct validity is if your simulator is capable of telling experts from novices, if it can tell them apart. Concurrent validity is if it can correlate with the current operating room performance, meaning if as a trainee you get all your training on your virtual reality simulator, and then if you go to the actual robot, then does your performance improve with respect to or in comparison to the time where you didn't have any virtual reality training. And predictive validity, meaning it is predicting the training transfer not for now but for later in the operating room. So we're very proud that, you know, our simulator has been studied by many individuals, and these are not Mimic employees at all. These are independent research partners, independent surgeons, independent robotic surgeons from all over the world who just made a lot of research studies, and they compared different training paradigms by using control groups. Like they put an amount of people to only robot, and then they train them on the robot. They put an amount of people only on the simulator, and they train them on the simulator, and they bring those two different groups together and test them on the robot to see if these training methodologies are working hand in hand, or if they're comparable. And they have really fascinating results from that, and it's working great for the virtual reality simulators. It's doing a good job. And one of the articles concluded that the virtual reality simulator of ours is like 98% the same of the robot, and that's a very high level of confidence. And I have some more images in some slides, but I think if I can't show the images, really it won't make sense. I was just going to talk about the fact that we had dry lab versions of simulated exercises, just as I have touched before a little bit. What we do is for some dry lab exercises, we both had the simulated version of it in the simulator, and we have like a Lazy Susan version of it, or like a plastic version of it in actuality. And what we do is for people who both own a robot and a simulator, we also can provide them with these physical models so that they can do the exact same exercise both on their simulator and also on their own robot if they want to. And that worked great for validation studies. Like if people want to compare people's performance on the robot and on the simulation, then you really need to have similar environments or same environments to work on, to test objectively. And that's pretty much it about medical simulation and robotics. I can tell you, and this would be a great time to further discuss anything that you'd like to discuss, or just answer some questions if there are any.
Sure. Well, Mert, thank you. Your passion for your field is obvious. So you seem to really like your work, and
thank you. Mimic is composed of really passionate people to just improve healthcare in general, and we're really excited about this technology, and we would really like to utilize it to the best.
It's obvious, and also let me just quickly say that simulation, you're dealing with two technologies here. Of course, the robotics showing you how to utilize those computerized machines to the most effectiveness, but also the technology of simulation, which is kind of training people, which is also used, medical students use it. Of course, most doctors are familiar with when they take ACLS, which is a cardiac life support course. They've had a robot for a long time, but I imagine nowadays, I haven't taken ACLS lately, but I imagine today they probably have robots that respond well to different simulated cardiac emergencies. And I know some medical schools are using simulators, and in parts of Florida there's an anesthesiology simulation, I believe at the University of Florida in Gainesville, that helps you lead through procedures like intubation. And let me just quickly go through, Mert, some things I just ran across before our talk tonight about the things that are happening in robotics, and you can comment on anything that you think may be relevant to the robotics field. Now, this is one thing that surprised me. I certainly knew about robotic surgery, and I'd seen that machine around, but I didn't know that robotics had more than the surgery part. It involves the use of mechanized systems to aid humans in many ways. And this first one, I'll quickly go through these. It's called a HAL-5. It's an exoskeleton developed in Japan, which actually doubles the strength of the person using it, so you can lift twice as much weight, which kind of surprised me.
Wow, amazing!
That's. I just saw this today. It's called a HAL-5. Okay, this is Mert just went over this. This is the system and the console, and the one of the things that you did talk about, the advantages. I imagine a surgeon, some of this cardiac surgery lasts like 8 hours, so probably makes the surgeon a lot more effective. Is there a lot of cardiac surgery going on in robotics, Mert, or?
I probably wouldn't be the best person to talk about it, but I know that there are heart surgeries in general going on, and I believe cardiac is part of a heart surgery, or it is a heart surgery.
It's a long surgery. It's a long, like 8 hours.
What I can tell is the robot is ergonomically adjustable, meaning like I can demonstrate it here on the simulator. So the robot's console can go up and down, like you see now. The simulator is going up, and now it goes down, and then just like in the actual robot, I'm gonna just move my laptop here a little bit because I'm connected to the laptop with the cable in my headset. But
okay, I gotta move the screen here. Let me see here. Yeah, okay, there we go.
So what I'm gonna do is, you see the stereoscope here in the robot and in our own simulator, it tilts.
Yes.
And then it goes up and down.
Okay.
So and
okay.
In the actual, and also like the armrest here, I don't know if you can see this, but it goes up and down as well, the armrest. So you know, we have very different body types when it comes to anybody, and it's the same for surgeons as well. There are very tall surgeons, there are short surgeons. Some surgeons, you know, wanna kind of like work in a upright manner. Some surgeons want to kind of like work in a more comfortable manner. So for those different cases, the robot is designed such that you can adjust the ergonomics of it. So for those especially long surgeries, you know, they can change around their ergonomics over the surgery, or they can just find the sweet spot for them so that, you know, it's not going to be very painful for them to handle those long surgeries. And it's replicated in the simulator as well.
Okay. Okay, let me just quickly go through the rest of the things I saw, which I was kind of surprised. And let me know if you can see. Can you see the screen?
Just so you know, there you go. It just comes back and forth. It kind of like flickers.
It's kind of an, and we apologize to people. The Google screen share is kind of funky. It's acting up. But let me just go through. I'll just get it off the screen share here.
Okay.
Let me just briefly describe the things I saw. And Mert and I were talking about this before we started the broadcast. The Sophie, it's invented by a Netherlands doctor, which is at the surgical bedside, which allows a tactile feedback to the surgeon tying knots, and allows feedback to the sensation of pushing tissue, but that is still years away. Can you comment on that, Mert?
Yeah, long before Sophie or Sophie-like robots came to life, we always believed that, you know, with this fascinating technology of robotics, there would be more and a variety of different applications available at some point eventually. To medical robotics, to robotic simulation anyways. And currently, as I have commented on before, Da Vinci by Intuitive is not designed to let the user feel any tactile feedback or force feedback on the tissues, but we believe that eventually there will be other companies who would decide that it might be important for them to include that. And it might be important for people to include that. So we see here with Sophie that, you know, that idea is coming to life here, you know, which through its own interface it is providing people with touch, and who knows, maybe it's going to be a valuable thing for the surgeon because like usually it's a tougher learning curve according to our experience when experienced laparoscopic surgeons start to learn or start getting their training on the robot because they're used to a certain level of haptic feedback from their laparoscopic instruments. They're used to like pulling and pushing and those tissues applying forces to their hands, but in the robot that's no longer the case. However, we also experienced that, you know, just because the vision is so high quality and it's so close to the tissue, at some point some people, some experienced surgeons say that they feel like they start feeling those tissues because the view of those tissues is so crisp, and they can see even the different coloration or color changes as they retract something or as they push something or grasp something, because usually when you do that, the tissue immediately, the live tissue immediately starts changing color. Like when you retract it, they become wider and like more transparent, especially if it's a thin adhesion, for example. So we have like different ideas about that, and we think that maybe force feedback technology would be a useful one for training and also for robotics in general.
So the visual aspect is getting more powerful than tactile. It's compensating for the lack of tactile.
Correct. Yeah, and it's quite powerful. I mean, really, the vision skill is really quite powerful, and it's not that surprising. I think, I mean, there are some studies that kind of like shows the difference, or that shows how the vision can compensate for the lack of other senses. And that's kind of what we are hearing from the experiences of some very experienced surgeons on the robot.
Very
but
good. Let me just finish off.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, another design aspect that is different with this particular robot, Sophie, is that the patient side, as you said, is attached on the operating room table. Unlike Da Vinci, in Da Vinci, the patient side is like a tower, and the instrument arms approach from the top. You can still adjust them and fine-tune them, but the tower, that patient side, is separate from the operating room table. But in the case of Sophia, I believe the patient side is much smaller in footprint. And since you can attach it to the operating table, you can actually move the operating table, and as you move the operating table, the relative local workspace or coordinates of the actual patient side will stay the same, which might make some of the design issues simpler for that robot. That's what I wanted to comment on.
Okay, well, I guess we'll certainly watch to see that develop. And quickly to go through a couple other things of medical robotics that I saw before our telecast was, and you can comment too, Mert, on this, a Cyberknife, which is a robotic radiosurgical device, which essentially targets in on a cancer or tumor very accurately, and basically attempts to radiate a tissue a little bit more accurately than by strictly the eye, because it combines a check of the MRI or CT with the radiation. So it's supposedly very approaching a molecular type of radiation, so they can define one molecule that's affected by the cancer, one that's not, which is pretty miniature. Okay, there's a Reba, which is a friendly teddy bear that lifts patients up, and I wish I had the picture to show you that. It's especially handy in nursing homes, but the weight so far is only up to 135 pounds, so it's quite limited. There's the InTouch telemedicine module, which is used in some ICUs. It's being used in Northwest Pennsylvania in rural areas. It's also being used in some jail systems to monitor cardiac patients. There's a local Mert, which is a quite useful device that's used in stroke patients. It's almost like an exoskeleton that a post-stroke patient will wear. And the interesting thing about this is it adapts to every person, because every person, one size does not fit all. Everybody has all kinds of variations of stroke, of muscle weakness, etc. So you have to kind of adapt to every individual patient. So the robot, and I'm sure Mert can tell you about the programming part of that, but they adapt to each person's level of incapacitation as far as the rehab. I'm sure rehab people are very glad to hear about that. There's a big machine, and again, I wish I had the picture. It's called the IntelliFill IV robot, which automatically fills IV drip preparations, which comes in handy because a lot of IV drip preparations are made for ICU patients, and it's kind of a tedious task for an ICU nurse to set that up. And there's a Simroid. That's what this robot's called. It's a training simulator, like we talked about. It's designed for dental students, actually, to extract teeth, and it actually gives feedback Mert, for pain. If the student makes a wrong move, the patient will scream.
That's
That's
very
kind of
cool.
funny.
That's very cool. And I was gonna say in dental simulators like that, which simulates extracting a tooth, it's very important for correct haptic feedback for them to get, because they need to feel the amount of power that they need to apply to pull that.
Yeah. Again, the haptic situation is hopefully coming in all types of surgery. Well, I'm sorry. I apologize for the technical difficulties.
Oh, that's
But we're working on it, and we'll get better.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
I'd like to thank Mert for spending time, and his company for letting us use the wonderful background. Mert, I have to hire your interior decorator. I think I need a consultation there with my background here.
We're pretty proud of our director of art and also our 3D artist. They do an amazing job when it comes to art.
Well, my compliments to him.
But at the same time, sorry, I was just going to say, at the same time, a lot of these images are straightly taken from the simulator as well. So, I mean, it's showing the realism as well there.
Well, some of the best art I've seen is medical images, and sometimes you wonder if it's art or is it actual image. But well, anyways, we better get going because we kind of run over. But
sure.
Mert, thank you very much, and hang around later for the post the autopsy. Okay.
Oh yeah, thank you very much. It's our own
pleasure.
Mert. To be there.
Okay, thank you.
All right, bye.
Okay, signing off. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hold on, Mert.